All right, this is the Pro Wrestling Illustrated podcast. I'm your host, PWI senior writer Al Castle, back once again with my co-host Brian Solomon. How's it going, Brian?
Very well. Happy to be here as always, Al.
All right, and joining us this week, Righteous Reg, back on the show. What's going on, Righteous?
Very excited to be back on the show with you guys to talk some professional wrestling. There's always so much going on. There's like a million things going on right now, so interested.
Yeah, absolutely. We got a big, well, I don't know how big. I guess that'll be one of the things we talk about. Premium live event. I'm still going to call it pay-per-view. I mean, it's gonna, they're calling it pay-per-views for whatever, 40 years.
PLE.
PLE just doesn't roll off. Maybe in some ways it rolls off the tongue more, but I'm just not used to it. With Backlash this Saturday in Puerto Rico. And, in some ways there's even more focus, I think, about the show after that, Night of Champions.
Yeah.
And I think it's going to be a lot of discussion here with, I guess, essentially the return of the brand split, a couple nights of the WWE Draft wrapping up last night. What, if anything, does it all mean? How consequential or not is all this? And I guess sort of the bigger picture there is the creation of another world title. Was it called a second world title? I guess it's a third world title, right?
Yeah.
Because Roman's got two of them.
Yeah, it's a third for now.
And I guess we'll share our thoughts on all of that, and then maybe also talk a little AEW and what the hell is going on with CM Punk showing up in every locker room, but the one that he works in.
Apparently, he played Uno in the Impact locker room. So.
Is that right?
Yeah.
See, wrestlers used to play cribbage in the back. Now they play Uno. It's a new world. It's a new world.
And having Reg here, who we hope to have on the last podcast, and there was some miscommunication. So we got to squeeze a little Impact Wrestling into this podcast. We'll talk a little bit about Trinity Fatu joining the Impact roster. I think it's a big deal. But real quick, let's talk about the latest issue of Pro Wrestling Illustrated. It is the June 2023 issue. I think fair to say one of the more talked about covers we've had in a while. Because it's real cool. And you know what? When you think about like the history of the magazines and how you remember one from the other, it is so much about those covers. And I think this is one that folks will remember, a throwback with the Impact women, the Knockouts. So a lot of fun, a lot of great content in here as well. Brian, your hot seat interview with Nick Aldis, speaking of Impact stars. I got a feature in here about Bray Wyatt. And so much more in this issue. Head on over to PWI-online.com and pick it up. Whether you are subscribing or you want just the one issue, you can do it all at PWI-online.com. You subscribe, you get a deep savings over the cover price. It's the way to go. The new PWI app, customized for your mobile device. It's not just a PDF. It's a real different look and feel. And gets to you a lot quicker. We are just wrapping up the next issue, and I'm not exactly sure what the on sale date is. It's probably in here, but in any event, you get it a couple of weeks before May 11th. So is when the digital edition comes out of the following issue, and the print is not out until May 30th. So you get it a few weeks early. It's the way to go. Head on over to PWI-online.com. While you're there, you can do all things PWI. You can subscribe to the PWI free weekly newsletter, listen to this podcast, other podcasts, so much more. Again, PWI-online.com. Let's jump into it, guys. So last night was the second, the draft used to be like a big deal, and they treated it. They wanted us to think it was a big deal, but really, I'm not going to go through all the names, because really it at the end, really it's like, who cares? I mean, I don't mean to be that negative about it, but it feels like very little changed. And really the the brand split wasn't completely abandoned, but it was very, very loose in the last couple of years, with guys flowing back and forth. What's more, it seemed to be working. I think that's kind of one of the more puzzling things was, the whole "if it ain't broke, don't fix it" thing. WWE's been doing great business as of late. I think part of that is being able to have Roman jump. Their big star jump between the two brands, be the one world champion for both brands. It seems to be a shift in business strategy over there. The return of at least for now. And this is like the 100th time that we've dealt with this. We'll see how long it lasts. What they seem to be suggesting is a pretty strict brand split and a new world title for the Raw brand, Roman Reigns staying on the SmackDown brand. So Reg, I'll begin with you. From a business approach, what do you think the logic is here in going this route, splitting things up again, and having two world champions?
I think actually this is probably the best time for them to do this. I heard that they're also discussing bringing back brand PLEs, which I think is great in the time that they have Peacock and how business is at the moment. They needed to have another world champion on Raw for a long time. This Roman Reigns just kind of, if they were going to do, I think it would have worked if it was a wrestler that was here full time and was on both shows all the time being world champion. But Roman was a part-time wrestler that was just on SmackDown, mostly doing SmackDown angles.
And barely on SmackDown.
Yeah. And there weren't any contenders on Raw at all. Everybody just felt like geeks over there because it's like, well, what are you guys fighting for? Nobody's even saying what they want to fight for at this point because they're like, I'm not going to beat Roman, or I'm not even going to have the opportunity to beat Roman. So maybe I'll challenge for the United States Championship. And it's like, that doesn't have the same weight. Like that, the money in the bank briefcase being a part of the United States title also was weird. Them not having the Elimination Chamber. Like there's so many moments that another world champion was needed. And so I think it was a perfect timing for this. I'm nervous already out the gate because you said they're trying the hard brand split, but what's this free agents thing like?
Yeah,
that they're already saying that there could be stipulations or things that could go on top of it to change it. And I'm already like, you guys, like, how could just like do a hard brand split? Because I think adding some identity to both shows is going to help. I know business doesn't matter. They're going to wrestlers are going to be wrestlers wherever, but kind of having some identity to both shows, I think will be very good for the brand split. But like you said, it felt like not a lot happened. It was there wasn't any surprises. There weren't anything that like we're talking about today. Like, I can't believe this person went to this show. No. It's just like, oh, this person went to this show. That's cool.
But I also wonder, I mean, what would that have been in as much as we're so used to seeing wrestlers on either show? I mean, I think about when John Cena was drafted away from SmackDown to Raw. This is now, 15 years ago. And it was a big deal because, John Cena was synonymous with SmackDown. I don't know if there are a lot of guys that are that way. I guess Roman sort of, because they're used to seeing the Bloodline act on SmackDown. But I think that's one of the things that kind of, took some of the oomph away from the draft was that it felt like, by and large, people stayed on the brands that we're used to seeing them. The entire Bloodline stays on SmackDown. Seth Rollins is on Raw. They did switch the women's Bianca going over to SmackDown. And, a couple little things here that are kind of noteworthy, but nothing that like knock your socks off kind of thing. But Brian, this is a real debate, and it's an interesting debate because there really are two valid views of this. And Brian, I think you've talked about liking one world champion for both brands. But Reg brings a good point up that does leave the other brand kind of hanging a lot of times, especially when the champion is mostly on one brand and Raw being kind of the flagship show. It is true that for the better part of whatever it is, 3 years, they have not had a world champion to really kind of hang their hat on week in, week out.
I understand that, but there's a lot of other ways that they could have dealt with this. Like, it just seems to me like ever since WrestleMania, they were on this high and everybody was all excited, the Triple H era, and what does this mean and all that stuff. It just seems like, at least this is my point of view, they've been doing whatever the opposite is of a victory lap. They've been doing it's just like a cascading avalanche of one bad decision after another. That's like mind-boggling. I get the Roman Reigns thing, that he's hardly ever around. I feel like there were other alternatives. Like, Reg, you mentioned the thing with the U.S. title and the Intercontinental title. I feel like there was a way, and they almost were trying to do it, to make those titles way more important so that it becomes a thing like where it's like, okay, we know Roman Reigns is the world champion. That's the mountaintop, right?
Yeah.
But on Raw, our top title is the US title. On SmackDown, our top title is the IC title, whatever. And then above all that is the Universal Champion. Like they could have gone that route. They refused to go that route. They could have gone the route. Look, you want to have your 2 world titles. You want to have your other champion. Triple H is trying to mess with Roman Reigns, right? Because he's ducking everybody and he's not being a good champion and he's cheating and he's doing this and that. Take one of the belts away from him. Just say, you know what?
You already have 2 world titles. Yeah.
Right. We're stripping you of one because of the way you've defended it, the way you've carried yourself. We're going to take one away from you and we're going to put it up for grabs. With this, it's just like, hey, there's this other world title. Like, where did it come from? They're sort of hinting that it's supposed to be the old, like, world heavyweight title, but they haven't even really made that clear. And that belt was already unified years ago. And, like, I watched, see, this is the thing. Like, this exemplifies for me why I'm so annoyed by the way they've handled this other world title. They had Seth Rollins on the show last night, and he's all excited and he's like rejoicing that there's a new title that he could win because Roman Reigns is ducking him and not giving him a chance. And I'm like, why would he actually want that? Like, that makes him look like a loser.
Yeah.
Like, it makes him look like, well, I can't beat you, but look, they made this other title that I could win. Isn't that great? Like, it's just like a
finally I get a chance.
Right. Yeah. It looks like a consolation prize to me. Like, to me, like I said, there's so many other ways that they could have handled this. How about this? I'm not behind the scenes. I don't know what Roman Reigns is like to deal with or whatever. How about this? How about you say, tough crap, you're going to be on this show more often. We're not asking you to wrestle every week. I don't think the world champion should really be defending very often on Raw or SmackDown.
Right.
But you got to show your face. I'm sorry. You have to show your face. And if you don't want to, we have to take the belts off you. They could have also done that. There were so many different things they could have done other than what they did.
Right.
All that said, Roman is so hot, and I think it's with Roman, the formula is working, right? So I am reluctant to put him on TV more and have him work.
True.
Whatever they're doing, it works because Roman does feel like a much, much bigger star.
Special.
It's a gulf between him and number 2. And that's it's sort of a good problem to have, but it is a problem, right? Especially when, as you're talking about, you're creating this other world champion. Even when you look at the contenders, it's like, yeah, I guess Seth Rollins is, would be a fine world champion, but he's no Roman Reigns.
But when you create a title out of thin air, that's the thing. It's like whoever wins it, it just doesn't make them. I mean, look, maybe I'm out of touch. Maybe the average fan doesn't care about this. That's possible, but it doesn't make them feel like they're anything important. Like they could just come out every week and just say, "Here's another world title for you." Like, what does it matter? That's why I brought up the thing of like splitting the 2, because at least, even though I'm not crazy about that, at least if they do that, that other title has some kind of relevance. You're like, okay, this is the WWE Championship, or this is a Universal Championship.
And you don't mess with that 1,000 days that they seem so concerned about, right? I mean, he would still have the 1,000 days.
Because Roman hasn't had both belts for 1,000 days, only the Universal one. So, and like, could you imagine? And I'm like up at night dreading this, but could you imagine? Because I feel like this is where this is going. If Cody wins that belt,
I know
that's the worst.
They might have buried him in the ground with a shovel at that point.
And it was one of the first things that occurred to me, and I think a lot of people watching this is like, oh, this is how they're gonna get the belt on Cody, and again, I do think there's a difference between us and one kind of fan and then the casual fans that are filling these arenas,
right?
For whom they might not care. They might think, yeah, sure, Cody is as the new world heavyweight champion, awesome. But it really is, coming off of WrestleMania and all the disappointment. We've talked about this in the last few episodes, and how deflating that was. We've talked about how there's a way to salvage this. This is like the worst case scenario. I mean, like, I can't imagine a worse way to go than to create a phony world title and put it on Cody, and that's the end of the story. I mean, that's the in Saudi Arabia.
And the thing that's
I just can't imagine.
The thing that's super concerning about this is after WrestleMania, everyone was saying exactly as you're saying, they're going to finish the story. They're going to wrap this up. But now, if they're sticking to this brand split, they're on two different brands. How do you tell the story of Cody winning the belt now when he's on a different brand? People were saying, oh, maybe at SummerSlam. How are they going to get him on a different brand at SummerSlam? And also, I think a bad scenario of this is giving Cody the Money in the Bank briefcase. I don't think that he needs that. I don't think that he needs anything to be a contender for the belt. And if they give him this new title, it's just going to be so
It'd be
sad.
awful. Yeah. I mean, look, optimistic side of me is Cody does not get this world title. I could very much see them doing Seth versus Cody in Saudi Arabia for the world title. Seth wins it. And the point of keeping them, Roman and Cody, on separate brands is to keep them apart until the next WrestleMania. You know, Cody wins the Rumble again or whatever. And I guess having two world titles, that's maybe one small upside, is that it does create a little more of a question of who could win the Royal Rumble. And that was one fun thing about having two world titles before, was that it wasn't that clear because they could go a couple different ways. But you talk about unsatisfying. I mean, if Cody wins this world title, it'll be just. And I can't imagine that Cody would be on board for that.
No, there's another theory that people have had, which I don't think is true, but it makes you think. If this entire scenario with introducing this third belt is just basically like a subterfuge with the idea that Roman is going to win that one too.
That's
I kind of love that. Yeah,
Could you imagine?
I think that'd be hilarious.
I mean, if they did that,
that'd be so
I would
sick.
almost be okay with it. If that was
3 belts.
They made another one so Roman couldn't get it and he just gets it anyways.
Yeah,
and he
that'd
just
be crazy
gets it anyway, because they seem to be all in on like doing everything for this guy. So I wouldn't be terribly surprised if that happened.
You know, one thing that's also kind of looming over this is always the man Brock Lesnar, because if Brock Lesnar becomes that new world champion, we're right back to square one. I feel
another part-timer.
Right before they unified it, you're right back to where it was.
Right. And another part-timer. But that said, I mean, is it again, in as much as the Roman Reigns called experiment, it's more than experiment at this point, but it works to, it sort of reminds me of the days, pre-social media, where you're a big movie star showing up on Johnny Carson was a big deal, right? Because these guys didn't give interviews. You didn't see in Al Pacino or whoever you want to go before that, the Rock Hudsons of the world. They were elusive.
They didn't promote their own movies back then. That was not the marketing companies hadn't completely taken over by that point. Like you couldn't get those movie stars to go on promotion tours. The big ones didn't happen.
Now you could tweet at one of them and they might respond to you.
Seriously.
It's such a change. And I think that's one of the things that, or forget about that comparison, the wrestling comparison. Hulk Hogan, you did not see Hulk Hogan on Superstars of Wrestling, wrestling every week. Maybe every 3 weeks he might show up on Brother Love or something like that. And if you wanted to see him wrestle, Saturday night's main event every other month, or maybe a house show if it was the A show. Once every month, once every 6 weeks. So there's something for that strategy. So this drive to, we need a world champion to be on our brand every week, wrestling, what have you. I don't know that that's a great idea, and clearly they went the opposite route with Roman, and it's really, really worked. So is it the worst idea in the world to put the world title on Brock Lesnar, the new world title? Maybe it is.
Yes,
maybe the second worst idea. The worst being
worst is Cody, far and away.
Cody,
yeah. I'll throw Bray Wyatt into the mix somewhere there too. But in terms of a brand split, separate than the discussion of the two world champions. What do you think about it? There's some thought that maybe this is less WWE's decision than it is some of the networks involved, and I get that. You want, like, I don't know. I mean, you want some stability. You certainly want a world champion. But what do you think, Reg, the thinking, the strategy is in returning to the firm brand split?
I don't know.
You talked about maybe differently branded PLEs. That's something, I guess.
That's something, but as you've been saying, it's been so mixed up. Like nobody seems like one brand. And if they're gonna go hard on this next Monday, I'm all in. I'm excited about it. I think they made some really cool choices with like some NXT talent. I think a couple of the moves that they made from SmackDown to Raw, I think Raw could become a better wrestling show with some of the moves that they made. So that's interesting. But the reason why they're doing it, I have no idea. It just felt like, well, it's after WrestleMania. We did this big thing with Roman. What's next? Oh, let's do a draft. We usually do one of those. That's kind of what WWE has become. Is like, we usually do one of those. It's April. Let's this. It's October. Let's do it in Hell in the Cell. It's June. Let's do a blah, blah, blah. So it doesn't feel like this was needed. It's just here, and it's exciting ? I don't know. Like, are people excited about this? Feels like they get excited about anything up there at this point.
The live crowd, they just eat this. The current WWE crowd, they will just eat anything up.
Anything.
It's pretty wild. I mean, in some ways it helps because I think it's helped Cody a lot because the AEW fan base was so critical and so snarky and so ready to tear him apart. And his presentation has been exactly the same pretty much in WWE, and they love him. So I think it's helped. But like all this stuff you're talking about, like where they're just doing things and you're like, why are you doing this? It starts to make me begin to assume that Triple H's creative control isn't quite as firm as it was because he was very much, even when he'd talk about his like strategies and things, he was against that idea of just doing things for the sake of doing it. He would even bring that up, like, we're not going to do a Hell in the Cell pay-per-view anymore. We're not going to do that. Things are going to make sense. So I start to wonder, like, if it's Vince or Endeavor or whatever kind of stepping in, and not that they're taking over, but that they're like, it's a little bit more of a like more cooks in the kitchen kind of thing. It's not really his total vision as it might have been in the last half of 2022. But you know, the brand thing, I was there when they started it. I was literally there. And I was like, I was very vocal. I mean, not that I had any power whatsoever, but I was like, what is this? Like, because I remember they came to us and they were like, we're doing a brand extension. And this was in 2002. And I was like, what the hell is a brand? And that's what everybody was like, because we were like, what do you mean? And we had this whole discussion. It's 20 years later, whatever, things have changed. But we were like, the average fan does not even think of WWE as a brand.
Right.
They think of it as like a league, like it's like a federation. Like they don't even, it's a brand internally, like from a corporate point of view. Like, why are we putting this in people's faces like this is a brand? Like it's just a brand. It's not like a real thing. Like, and to create this false, like, I still feel this way. Does the average fan even know who, other than the very, very top, like we know, like you said, Roman Reigns is a SmackDown guy. Does the average fan even know what person is on what brand? I mean, I feel like even though SmackDown these days gets more of a viewership than Raw does, I'm pretty sure that the majority of weekly WWE fans are watching both shows. Not all of them, but the majority.
Feels
so
like
are they even thinking in those terms? Like it's this phony baloney thing of like creating this rivalry between brands that I think the people that are most excited about it are the people inside the company, like more than anybody else. Fans want compelling angles and storylines, you know, compelling characters, great matches. The idea of these brands is just, it's this force-fed thing that we can't get rid of for 20 years. It's like a bad penny that keeps coming back.
Yeah.
I don't know. You know,
there is a business justification to it, right? And when you talk about 20 years ago and what the genesis of the idea was WCW, right? There was a point after they bought WCW where the idea was we're going to run two companies separately. Then they kind of abandoned that and thought, well, maybe there's a way for us to still do it, but just with our own two companies. We'll split up Raw and SmackDown to two different companies. And you're right that I think that it's become so sort of like blurred that you don't know who's on which brand. But that, and I'm somewhat being a devil's advocate here, that's the problem, right? And I do think that at its best, when we've seen the brand split over the last 20 years, it has been pretty clear and delineated. And there certainly was a time where I could tell you who was on Raw and who was on SmackDown. And that's why when they would, the draft used to be more meaningful, because when a John Cena moved from SmackDown to Raw, it was like, holy crap, he's like Mr. SmackDown. And now he's going over to Raw. So it's all to say that I think there's a way to do this right. And if done right, there could be an upside business-wise, which is running, essentially doubling, your I don't want to say doubling your metrics, but right now, if you run two different house shows on a weekend, right, there's going to be the A show and the B show, right? Because you've got so many stars, and if you've got a Cody and whoever on one show, then you don't have that top star on the other show. The idea would be split them up and try to build them both up so there is some parity between the two of them. And, you could run two A shows on a weekend, or as you touched on, you can run two premium live events theoretically in the same month. And it's not overkill because they're really two different companies. So there is a way to do it that works. It's not lost on me that this comes right after the Endeavor merger, and they're looking for out of the box ideas on how to increase revenue. This sounds potentially like a Nick Khan kind of initiative.
Well, I think the main reason it keeps getting pushed like this, and I think you guys hinted at this already, is the fact that both shows are on different networks.
Yep.
So they're jockeying. You got USA with NBC, and you got Fox, and they want their show to be special. When look, in a perfect world, the smartest thing to do from WWE's standpoint, not the networks, is if you have continuing storylines from Monday to Friday. So you like they used to do, you leave people on Monday wanting to watch on Friday to see what's going to happen next, and the shows feed into each other and flow into each other. But that doesn't help the networks because they're only looking at their one show. And if their one show is just a continuation of what happened on the other network show, I could see how they'd be kind of annoyed by that. But I think that's the root of the problem. I think if both shows were on, I don't see this happening, but if both shows were on the same, well, who knows with all this everything.
They have a new thing coming up this year, don't they?
Yeah, if both shows were on Fox, if both shows were on USA, or if both shows were just on Peacock or whatever, I think this whole thing would go away. I really do. I think they would completely not even bother with it anymore if the shows were on the same platform.
Yeah. Without going through everybody who was drafted, I am interested in what are there interesting developments, interesting matchups that arise from this split? I mean, now that we have a picture of who's where. So on SmackDown, there's Roman. Who does Roman have to work with now? He stays with the Bloodline. Bobby Lashley's over there. Yeah. That's a match they've never really done on a big scale.
Just for Lashley to lose, that'll be great.
Yeah, but I mean, is that a viable SummerSlam main event? Maybe. So I think it could be. Depending on what you do. Over on a Raw, you've got Cody. You've got I guess Gunther is going to be one of the top guys over there. Who else is again? Maybe I should have the list in front of me, but it does feel like, and this is just a largely a product of the Bloodline being kept together, and on SmackDown, it does feel like Raw kind of drew the short end of the stick kind of thing. I mean, they've got Cody, and that's kind of the biggest star they have, but it's also like, well, who's going to work with Cody? Seth, I guess they go back to that. And anything jump out at you, Reg, that's sort of like exciting about new matchups or potential for matchups or feuds that are created here?
Probably Gunther, like you said. I think he has the best potential on Raw to interact with guys like Seth Rollins and Cody Rhodes and kind of bring another big element to the brand. Other than that, though, it just feels like I think there's going to be some good wrestling because they've added some NXT people that I think are exceptional at that. And
Just to jump in there, I'm not
Yeah.
crazy about the way they did that because it sort of defines these people down, right? That it's just sort of like, oh, and it's sort of like we'll throw in a couple of NXT people too. So you get Seth Rollins and you get this was and we'll throw in Cameron Grimes too, versus spending some time doing vignettes of Cameron Grimes and Bill or having him do the surprise run-in on 1 week and have the announcers go, oh, that's Cameron Grimes. By definition, the NXT people are the at the bottom of the draft. They're sort of the last picks. And I don't like at all for all these young talents. I don't like this as a way to call them up to the main roster.
Yeah, it's like there's some things that they could change. NXT as a whole, I still think they don't handle it at all. They still like Finn Balor was like this amazing NXT talent. And you still don't know. After all these years, they're still not like, well, he did this amazing thing in this place, because they just totally forget about it when they get up to the main roster. And I think that's what's going to happen with a lot of these NXT wrestlers. And I think they're going to get lost in the shuffle, especially if Vince McMahon has his hands on this, because he's going to be like, who's this loser and what are they doing? Who's Pretty Deadly? I don't care about those two losers. And it's concerning. Definitely off the rip.
Didn't Tony D'Angelo have them killed anyway? Like,
they're alive again, baby. Back to SmackDown.
Was Braun Breaker called up? I don't think he was, right?
No, he wasn't.
That's wild. I mean, that would have been like the first person you would assume.
The impression that I've gotten over the past year, because I've been on a couple of those like NXT media calls and things. And I actually asked a question once that I think Shawn Michaels got a little annoyed at, and I'm a little worried because I haven't been invited back, so I got to figure that out. But the result of what I hear sometimes when his name is brought up, just the sense I get is that they just feel like there's an issue with getting him ready. Like there's something about him that they don't feel is ready. Like he's got all the tools, as we know, he's got a great look and all this stuff, but they're just not willing to. I just can tell that it's like a sticking point issue for them. Like they want him to be ready, but he's not progressing to their liking of what they want to see. Like he's stuck in neutral. Like that may not be something that's apparent to all of us, but to whoever makes these decisions, they're saying he's not quite there yet. And I think that speaks volumes, like you said, that he wasn't one of the people called up. You would think that he would be.
Yeah, yeah. Where with the bloodline staying all together, there was some thought that maybe this is the opportunity to kind of like put this to an end, and but the bloodline stays together. And interestingly, Sammy and Kevin are now on Raw. So after this Saturday's show, with Cody and Kevin and Sammy being on Raw and the bloodline being on SmackDown, that sounds like it's the end of this program for now. Brian, what do you think is next for the bloodline? Clearly, there's like that tension with the Usos and the rest of the bloodline. Is it some speculation of a split within the bloodline that ends up with a program of Roman and Solo versus the Usos? Does Jay finally break apart and do his own thing? Where do you think this is going?
Well, another thing that I pointed out, which has to do with this, when I was railing against the brand split on Twitter, was just like the way that the draft will just abruptly end like a feud or storyline just for no reason. Like, well, it's over. There's no more to see here now. They're on separate shows. Nothing more to see as you go back to your business. And I'm just like, what? It's such an odd way to end it. I also think there was a missed opportunity there too, because if you wanted to create intrigue, wouldn't it have been intriguing, especially if they're thinking of getting people to watch both shows, if you split the bloodline, if you put the Usos on the other show, and then you create this whole drama where it's like the two sides, they're frustrated, they're stuck on opposite shows, they're trying to communicate back and forth week to week. You're watching each show to see, like, maybe they try to like dominate both shows together as a unit, like something. It was another safe thing of like, we're not really going to rock the boat or do anything different or status quo. I mean, on the positive side of it, it does make it easier for them if they want to do an actual like breakup of the bloodline with them all on the same show. If that's where you're headed, where it does kind of seem like that way, like the Usos are being, like Roman is just sort of like treating them now like they're the redheaded stepchildren because they can't get anything done and they can't, they're like failing him. So like maybe that's the way to go, and maybe this turns out to be something good for the Usos. But I don't know. Right now, it just seems like it was the safe choice to me.
Yeah. Fascinating that we've got this pay-per-view or PLE coming up Saturday, and it really is. I don't think it's like the third or fourth biggest topic even in WWE. It really feels like kind of an afterthought show like we haven't had in a while. I mean, you've got Cody and Brock, which has some marquee value, but after that, it just really feels like just thrown together. I mean, a 6-man tag and kind of the co-main event spot.
Like, have Omos and Seth Rollins even been on TV together at the same time?
Yeah. Io and Bianca. I mean, it just really feels kind of like less interesting than some episodes of Raw or SmackDown.
Seriously, if that was the Cody and Brock go home angle too, what they did that pull apart last night, it's like that's it. That's how we're building this.
Which they already did. It was the second time they did
it.
Right,
exactly.
Yeah, when I was watching last night and they showed clips of it because I wasn't paying that close attention, I assumed that what I was watching was the angle from a couple weeks ago, and this is earlier tonight. I was like, oh really? Didn't we see this already?
And I love Adam Pearce. I think Adam Pearce is great, but basically all he does now is he's just like exasperated for like 3 hours a week on television, just like begging people not to do things that they're going to do anyway.
Brock, please do not cause destruction.
Right. Please don't do like I don't know. I like him, but they might want to like change things up a little bit with him. Like not keep him, but change the approach a little bit. It's just like, why do you have to sometimes wonder, like, think of the segments that he's in and then think if he wasn't there, would it be any different than it was?
Yeah.
And a lot of times the answer is no. It's like he's a ghost or something. I don't know. That's just me nitpicking, but
Yeah. So over on the other channel, and I think it is interesting how this all works together because as you touched on, WWE had all this momentum going into WrestleMania, and it feels like right after WrestleMania, they really kind of hit the brakes and, making some kind of questionable decisions. Meanwhile, AEW, it seems to be kind of like really loading up with the Wembley show all in, the return of CM Punk in as much as it seems to be like a done deal, the creation of this new Saturday show. Let's talk a little bit about Punk. And again, he showed up on a WWE show some weeks back and had to be kicked out. And then over this past weekend shows up on Impact. Reg, how much of this is, there are the folks that say, this is that unusual, a wrestler showing up and saying hi to old friends. And, this is something you see in wrestling. I think it's a little disingenuous given that this is CM Punk and he hasn't done that in the better part of the last 8 years. And now he's, I guess, negotiating a return to AEW, and we haven't, and he leaves there under these very hostile circumstances. And all of a sudden now he decides to check in on old friends in WWE and Impact. What do you think is going on here?
This is hilarious. Those things were in the same week. He was at Raw on Monday and then at Impact on Saturday. So it's like, this isn't, just like you said, this is normal. There's wrestlers that are married in WWE and AEW. They're mingling. There's co-mingling. But CM Punk co-mingling is not normal. Him being at a WWE show and an Impact show in the same week is for a reason. He's out there doing something. He's building a narrative for himself, and he's trying to show that he can play ball in any Look, I'm in WWE. I said I hated them, but look, I'm over here having a good time. Look, I'm back in Impact having a good time with all these new people to show the people in AEW I could play ball. I'm good. People like me over here. I'm playing Uno in the back with these wrestlers. I'm shaking hands and kissing babies. Everything's fine with me. It's a ploy to make sure everybody knows that he's good. He's ready to come back to work and he's having a good time. I like it. I'm into it. I think it's hilarious that he showed up in WWE backstage with Tamina. Like he went through his cell phone. Like, who do I know that works there? Tamina. Hey, Tamina. What's up? Wouldn't it be cool if I came to work with you today? It's great.
She the
it's
one
amazing.
that brought him back there? I didn't know it was specifically.
Yeah. He came with Tamina. The video,
So
they have
random.
like a video of him outside.
Well,
with
because
Tamina,
they were both also at Impact too. Because
right, exactly.
She was there for Trinity.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know that she was the one that helped him get backstage at Raw. That's hilarious.
Mm-hmm.
I knew that he was brought back there by WWE talent. I didn't know specifically who. Do you also think it could partly be his like subtle, not so subtle way of almost saying like, if you guys can't work it out with me and we can't all play nice, I have a lot of other options. Like, could that be part of it too? I
would think so.
Yeah, I mean, there's also the thought I've heard that he's trying to get fired. This is him being kind of deliberately sort of, I don't know what the word is. I mean, hostile to his employer and, doing things that rub him the wrong way.
I thought that my understanding was that he was the party that was more in favor of working things out and coming back. I mean, at least that's the way it's been portrayed, and that the elite guys were the ones that were having more of trouble burying the hatchet. I mean, I don't know. Well, maybe that's not true. Who knows?
If you're Tony Khan, how do you feel about that? About CM Punk, who I guess word is you're going to build this new show around, is ostensibly without your permission or I don't know how much needs permission, but without your blessing or even a heads up, just showing up at all these shows. And you know what? There's already like this this idea, this reputation of Punk kind of emasculating Tony Khan at every corner. Reg, would you be annoyed by this if you're him?
No. Because if anything, this is building for him. Like, if anything, the story was an AEW wrestler was backstage at WWE, an AEW wrestler was backstage at Impact Wrestling. And everybody's thinking, what's this AEW wrestler going to be? The resolution is we see CM Punk back on your TV show and everybody has interest in seeing it. It's a win-win for you. I think the brawl out and the press conference, that did make Tony Khan look like, that's kind of interesting that this guy's talking like that right next to you. But other than that, it's like, what it took to get CM Punk? It was 7-8 years. It took a lot to get this man back. I don't think there's anything that he could do at this point to get fired. Like, you showing up at Impact, I don't care about that, dude. You showing up at WWE, that's weird. But like, also, I don't care. I wouldn't care about all this stuff because you're coming back to wrestle on my show at the end of the day.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about that. We just talked so much about the brand split on WWE, and it sounds like there may be a brand split on AEW driven in part by keeping CM Punk away from, the elements in the AEW locker room that don't like him, that they're going to build a whole show around him. I mean, that sounds crazy to me, Brian. I mean, it's like, this is not the way you want run a wrestling roster. Like, well, if you can't get along, then just stay in separate parts of the house or something like that.
Would they have done this in Memphis, Brian?
Yeah, it's just wacky. How do you think?
They actually had a weird brand split down there when they took over World Class, which failed, like all brand splits do.
Exactly.
So, no, but I mean, it's. I don't know how to. I mean, look, you also can't make the mistake. We've talked about this of Tony Khan is not Vince McMahon. Tony Khan is not Triple H. They're very different people. They have very different approaches to things, very different strategies. Like, look, I don't think that what happened at All Out would be a very different scenario if somebody tried to pull that in WWE. But I do think that Punk has tried. I don't know whether he's trying to or not, but it seems like the things he does almost are intended to make Tony Khan look weak. But I don't think that Tony Khan sees it that way. Like, I don't think these things bother him as much as they bother a lot of other people. But again, you do run the risk of having a situation where it's like the inmates are running the asylum. Like, you can't, at the end of the day, you do have to exert some kind of authority and say, like, look, you guys work for me and we have to work this out. And I'm the final word in this. And like when you have things like sometimes there's things that happen that I don't even think it happens so much with AEW that it's almost like we're numb to it and we're just like every day there's something new. But like even the idea that Kenny Omega is going out there saying like my contract is up in a few months or whenever it is, and at that point I don't know what I'm gonna do. And I'm reading that and I'm going like, you're the EVP of this company.
Yeah.
You're not just a wrestler there. Like, even if you're thinking that, that's, we know what Cody did and everything. To just come out and say that and to think like there's not going to be any repercussions, which there aren't, it just creates a weird environment over there. Like, I don't know. But again, like I've spoken to people, and Reg, you know better than any of us here. I've spoken to people who have told me that, granted, this was not that recently, but they told me that the environment, backstage at AEW is way healthier and less toxic than it is at WWE. So there's something to be said for that too. I mean, he must be doing something right. But again, like I don't know how much that's changed in like say the past year, because then you see things like look at John Moxley on Renee's podcast. I'm listening to that going like, holy cow, like wow, just the fact that he's comfortable even just airing all that and saying it out loud on a podcast is wild to me. Like I do start to think like there must be a lot of dysfunction creeping in over there.
Or like Dax is on his podcast too, spilling a bunch of stuff that maybe we shouldn't be saying.
I feel like there's going to be a ton of documentaries that are made like in years to come that will explain all of this better than what we know now.
Right. And for better or for worse, that all falls back on Tony Khan, right? And it paints this impression of a guy who is not managing his company well, that people would be so openly, I don't know if it's disrespectful, but not even giving any regard to how this might look, how the boss might think about this.
That's the thing, yeah.
Yeah, it's a bad look. So either way, they got the big show coming out, all in Wembley. Reg, before we started recording, you talked about, I guess, some early ticket sales, and there are signs that this may do really well. I know there were like 60,000 registrations, I guess. That's not necessarily 60,000 tickets sold, but how optimistic are you that they're going to have a really good-looking house for that event?
I'm pretty optimistic that they're going to get pretty close. I think they could get to 50,000 people in that building. I think there's a lot of excitement over in the UK, just in general, to see an AEW show. And there's a lot of talk online about people saying that there's two sides of it. There's people saying that they should load it with UK talent, kind of people that but then there's the other side that are like, no, we want AEW. I want to see Kenny Omega. I want to see MJF. I want to see CM Punk, ? Possibly. And so I'm more on that like they want to see the big main event should be like Kenny Omega versus somebody to show that AEW is going to do this. But I think there's a lot of general excitement. People online today are excited about the release. A lot of people trying to get tickets today, people in queues for hours and things. So there's some general excitement. I think when the real on sale goes on, it'll show us exactly what this is going to lead to. But I think this is great all around. I don't think there's any situation where they're going to have a bad turnout. Like there's 10,000 people showed up, guys, we're screwed. I don't think that will be an opportunity to happen here. So I'm excited about it.
Yeah, timing wise, it feels like they really need this, right? I mean, for so long, the narrative has been like they're really falling behind. And you look at some of these TV viewership figures, particularly for like Rampage, where I mean, these are just awful numbers that they do on some weeks. And they're really falling behind in terms of being that number two, competition for WWE. It feels so removed from like that Wednesday Night War. It really feels like WWE is sort of the definitive dominant number one, and there's this big gap to AEW. Putting 60,000 people in Wembley Stadium, if that's what it ends up being, and loading it up and having we'll see how SummerSlam does, but one of the biggest wrestling shows of the summer could go a long way, right, Brian, in terms of kind of reclaiming that credibility and that momentum?
Especially if they do what we were talking about, I think last time, in terms of like you get Punk back and you do Punk versus the Elite, either Punk versus Omega, and FTR versus Young Bucks, or you put them all together, something like that. Like that is the way to go. And to the point where, like we've said too, it almost makes me think you wouldn't have even have booked a show like this if you didn't have something like that in mind. Totally. Like, how could they go ahead and do this if it's just going to be like a regular show? It feels like they must have something special. And I agree with you, Reg, that you want your big guns, you want like the best of the best, because that's what fans expect. You know, like what would happen on these WWE international tours where they would try to do that, the fans would boo, they would reject it. Like, you know, no, really, because like they'd go to China and they'd find like their NXT guys who are Chinese or girls, and people would boo because they want to see, like, we want the stars, you know. The thing with Wembley and SummerSlam, like Davey Boy Smith, you know, that was a very unique thing where you had a WWF star who had a unique connection with the UK, and that was with UK fans, and that was built in already. AEW doesn't really have a scenario like that, right? So you don't want to like force it just by making it a bunch of UK wrestlers without any rhyme or reason. So I think the way to go is it's got to be as special of a show as you could possibly put together, because I mean, that would help them to really get a lot of buzz back and to really remind everybody, hey, we're still in this thing. Like, we're still a viable alternative, and help them get some of that vibe back, you know, that fans loved about them, still do, and want to love about them.
Yeah, I really do think like what they book on that show really is going to be a testament to if they know what they're doing, right? Because I'm sorry, I think there's part of me that thinks that, you know, knowing the way Tony Khan is, he's just going to think work rate for that show. So I'm going to, even if it's not super marquee value, I'm going to put on a match. You know, the main event's going to be whatever, Will Ospreay and Kenny Omega or something like that. And it's going to be 7 stars or something like that. And sort of like missing the big picture, which is, you know, what is on paper on the marquee, what is the big match that you could sell? Clearly it's Punk and somebody from the Elite. I mean, I do think it's probably Punk and Omega. You know, certainly all these stories that have unfolded over the last few weeks shows that at least he's walking in that direction. It sounds like it's going to take some buy-in from the roster and a lot of people who just don't like CM Punk and don't want to work with him.
The interesting thing is I think the worst real life beef seems to actually be between Punk and Hangman Adam Page. But I do think that, you know, Omega is the bigger name, the bigger star, and he's attached to the Elite, and they were legitimately fighting each other in the locker room. So it's a great, you know, that also has a lot of juice to it. Like I said before, I think worst case scenario, and this isn't a knock on MJF, but I think like your plan B is to do Punk and MJF for the world title. There's some history there. We know
that.
I know. I didn't say it was number 1. I said number 2 because we know that there is also some real life stuff going on between the two of them, and we also know that the original plan was that the passing of the torch thing would be not Moxley, but it was supposed to be Punk, and that whole thing got screwed up. So you could build something on that, but like I said, that's only if they can't make everybody play nice for, you know, Punk versus the Elite. That is like your plan B.
Dude, Tony Khan needs to go in the locker room and say, "Get it together. It's pro wrestling. People have died over there. Right? Go outside, dude."
Yeah, that's not him, you know. And I think that's one of the frustrations is that, you know, he is. It is both the selling point and kind of like the downside of Tony Khan and AEW is that he is the super fan, right? And so he kind of views everything through that lens. And I think it takes away some of the authority, but it also has, you know, he has this kind of like this jubilant sort of like approach to wrestling, which is cool. It's fun. But yeah, I don't know. You know, the other thing that happens, and we've talked about this a little bit, is like it's really becoming a parody with the big announcements, right? The major announcement. Now it's almost every week, and
Triple H did it. They had Triple H do it. I almost felt like they were making fun of it.
I think he did 2 in a row too. Triple H.
But I mean, this last one was you know, the Owen Hart Memorial Tournament being in Canada. I mean, it was the ultimate kind of like, with all due respect, I mean, that's just not that big a deal.
With the locker room, with getting everybody to work together too. Part of me is also like, it's time to move on with it. Like, this happened in September. How bad? It's easy for me to say. I'm a writer. I couldn't win a fight with a paper bag. Okay, fine, great. I chipped my ankle just getting into the WWE ring one time. Okay, so it's easy for me to say. But locker room fights happen. This isn't the first time that wrestlers have gotten into a fight, and the fight wasn't even that bad from the description of it. It sounds like the dog got hurt worse than anybody in the fight. So at this point, you got to move on. It was September. What are we doing?
Well, devil's advocate. It's not just about that fight. It's about CM Punk, right? I mean, that fight was the boiling over point, right?
That's when there was a lot leading up to that. Yeah.
It's that there is this guy that I think a lot of the roster just feels is a cancer to the locker room, and a guy who just doesn't fit with what we're doing and doesn't have the right intentions and shouldn't be here. And I understand that, and whether it ended up in fisticuffs or not, I think there's and maybe some people need to be grown-ups about this, but I think a lot of people just see, and they're not just like these young kids. I mean, hasn't Jericho expressed that he's got some real problems with Punk too? Yeah. So I mean, there are veteran guys who see Punk and just see a guy who doesn't have good intentions, who is not a good fit here, and don't think he has any business being part of this. They're kumbaya, and we've got this one guy who sticks out.
But it's like, look, Hogan was an awful person. A lot of people say that. But he made so much money. Like, I'm sure Bret Hart expressed his interest in hating Hogan so often, but Hogan was making a lot of money inside of him too, helping get these big houses. CM Punk's the same way. I'm sure you guys hate CM Punk, but the fans don't care about any of this. The fans don't care that you guys had a fight. The fans don't care that you guys don't like each other. They care about seeing the elite. They care about seeing CM Punk on their TVs. That's how they're going to go to these shows. They don't care about what's happening backstage. We're talking about all this online, but there's people that have moved on genuinely or never even cared in the first place about this fight. And I think that those are the people that are hurt the most by this, because it's like they're not trying to tell the story on their reality show. The Young Bucks, every time they bring it up, are like, we don't want to talk about it. It was a black eye in our career. Please don't even mention it. So it's like, you're not telling these people who have no idea what's going on, what the story is, and they don't care. So let's all not care, because I don't care.
I also think there's a segment of fans who aren't always following everything online or on Twitter, who, to those fans, and I've talked to fans like this, like at shows and things, who still are fuzzy on what even happened. Like all they know is all of a sudden those guys were off TV, and there never really was an explanation on TV. Their titles were taken away. And so you still have a segment of fans who maybe they have a vague notion, but they don't know as much as people think. And it's caused a lot of confusion. And I think that also may have driven some people away. But my perspective, if I could give my old school wrestling perspective on this is my brand, right? But like, here's the thing. What they would do in a scenario like this, I understand these guys can't get along. Maybe Punk is a locker room cancer. Who knows? Maybe he is the modern day Kevin Nash. Who knows? But you don't leave money on the table. So what they would do in a scenario like that is they would say, we're not going to leave this match on the table and walk away. There's a lot of money to be made. There's a lot we could do here. We could advance a lot of people's careers. We're going to do this. But we're not going to invite you back, like that kind of a thing. We're not. So like a short-term plan, there's a potential here to do something really special for the company. It doesn't mean Punk needs to be there forever and work with everybody forever. If you want to do this big angle, stick around for a little bit and then ride off into the sunset, more power to you. But it would be dumb not to try to capitalize on it, at least in the short term. You know what I mean?
What I'm not convinced of is that Punk will mean as much as he did when he came in a couple of years ago and was clearly a ratings draw. And at the time, the AEW fan base, I mean, the really hardcore fans, I think they saw it as, we won. We got Punk back, right? This guy that WWE cast aside and has been out of the wrestling business for 8 years. He's ours now. And now I think, when I think about the way they treated Cody toward the end, it is kind of cultish almost in a way. And I think in the narrative of the hardcore AEW fans, CM Punk is the enemy, right? I mean, he ruined everything. He betrayed our beloved elite and all that. So I don't know. So that does speak to what you're saying, in some money in a marquee match where he gets his comeuppance. But if the plan is just maybe do that match, but also build a brand around CM Punk week in, week out as your star.
That's a problem.
I don't know how fans accept him. I don't know if he's going to be welcomed back. So we'll see. A few minutes here left. I didn't want to touch on Trinity Fatu coming over to Impact Wrestling. They had their own major announcement, and that was it. And I think by Impact standards, it was a good payoff. That is a major announcement for them. Reg, what do you think about this fit? It's the big fish, small pond kind of thing. She gets to go over there and instantly be one of the biggest stars in the company. What's it worth in a company the size of Impact? I mean, how much real growth is it for her? And I kind of feel for her because I feel like she really kind of got a raw deal here. I mean, she left WWE showing a unity to Sasha. And sticking by her, by all accounts, this was more Sasha's fight than hers. And Sasha ends up the hot commodity, gets I don't know the figures, but it sounds like a pretty decent contract to work over in Japan. And then they tell Trinity, we really don't have room for you, and she ends up on Impact. How did this all work out for her?
Thankfully, Impact has one of the best women's divisions in all of pro wrestling. And I think what Trinity is trying to show post WWE is that they made a big mistake over there. Even if this is, even if Mercedes was a big part of this, she was still left in peril in a lot of times and put in positions or not put in positions that she should have been put in. People kind of have this perception of her as a dancer, or she was part of the Funkadactyl. She was this thing. She was on Total Divas. And I think she wants to now show that, no, I can go, I can wrestle, I can really do this. And Impact has a tremendous amount of very talented ladies that I think are going to put Trinity in a position to show the whole world that she's one of the best. And this could always, Impact is not final for anybody. This is the way that you go, you show what you can do, and then that's going to lead to something. And I think that's what this is going to be. She's going to go in here, make a big splash, and then move on to something greater, which I'm excited about.
Yeah, I'm surprised that she didn't end up back in WWE, especially once, the whole Sasha thing was squared away. She ended up where she ended up. And I don't know what the backroom dealings were there, but her husband works there. Her husband's part of one of the biggest acts in the company. I always thought she'd be a really good fit in the bloodline, that they could use like a strong woman in there. So again, as you touched on, maybe it's just temporary passing through. You put in your year in Impact and end up back in WWE. But Brian, is who gains more here, Trinity or Impact?
How's that even a question?
Yeah. But as Reg said, the upside for what's in it for her is a platform to be, it's kind of like that Nick Aldis thing. It is a smaller stage to show that you could be a big player, and she might not get that opportunity anywhere else.
Yeah, I mean, look, as far as the thing with Mercedes, with Sasha, look, everybody knew that Sasha Mercedes is the bigger star of the two, so like it shouldn't be that surprising that she would have a luckier go of it. Not luck, but I mean, just she would do better outside of WWE, because even when they left, like, she was more the one that everybody was talking about.
Yeah.
And the one that you would think that WWE would fight harder to get back. So, I mean, all things considered, I think it's not that bad. I mean, she's She's visible now. She's in, like Reg said, a great women's division. She's probably going to get the title. There's going to be some interesting matches. I've always felt WWE didn't use her enough to her potential. So to see her in there with people like Deonna Purrazzo and Jordan Grace, like that's fascinating to me. Those are like really interesting matches that you never thought you would see. So, I mean, that's the bright side of it. And then maybe she does eventually go back or go to AEW. Who knows? As long as she is not in the NWA dancing with Tyrus, I will be very happy.
Oh no!
Yeah,
that would be the ultimate awful, kind of trajectory. Hopefully.
I think between Aldis and Trinity, those are the two biggest pickups that Impact could get, because they're both unique in that super huge upside that hasn't been fully realized yet, name value, but also, for whatever reasons, wouldn't work as well anywhere else right now. You know? And on Impact, they both get to go over there. When you look ahead now to Bound for Glory, those are two marquee matches that they could have. Aldis challenging for the world title and Trinity challenging for the world title are a huge number 1 and number 2 matchup for them. So we'll see. I also think there is a way where Trinity ends up doing better than Sasha does. I haven't heard Sasha or Mercedes setting the world on fire, and I think some of what she's done for casual fans that, aren't that familiar with Stardom or what have you, they see it as kind of low rent, and they see her in what look like some kind of rinky-dink press conferences and putting over some women that they've never heard of and thinking, wow, Sasha really, kind of crap the bed here. Whether that's true or not, I think that's the perception by some casual fans, where Trinity, again, I think can go to Impact, show that she could work with some of the best women in the world, and then is a hot commodity that WWE could very much want back, I would think, and position and come in as part of one of the hottest acts in all of wrestling. So when this is all said and done, I think there's a way where Trinity comes out above Mercedes.
Yeah, I think it's possible, especially with the volume that Trinity's going to work. She's going to work way more often than Mercedes is. We're just going to see her out here doing more. She's already had a couple matches, or there's matches planned in Impact. There's already things going. There's already in motion, and she's just going to be more visible. I do feel like some casual fans will probably look at Impact as higher than Stardom, or what Mercedes is doing in Japan, just because they don't even know about Japan. They don't know about what's going on there. They know about
haven't seen her. Yeah, I mean, unless you're following super closely, you haven't seen Sasha Banks in whatever it's been, a year or more now.
Right. And I don't think. I mean, I don't know if I'm being naive or giving too much credit, but I also think, with the whole Usos thing and the bloodline and everything, you would think that Roman Reigns, would have enough stroke in the company to possibly even advocate for her coming back and saying, you know what I mean? I mean, she's part of the family. I mean, again, I might be giving him too much credit in terms of what influence he has, but I feel like maybe the one who's burned the bridge more might actually be Mercedes, even though she was the bigger star for them than Naomi was. So I mean, anything could happen.
And I think it would be a really good idea to you think about what's next for the bloodline. This is one thing that they haven't had is a powerful woman in there. And you see how that's helped Judgment Day, where Rhea really is the star of Judgment Day, right? And it lets you take that angle into the women's division. Imagine the bloodline being represented in the women's division. I think that could really work. So who knows? It sounds like it's going to be at least a ways away. I don't know how long Trinity signed for Impact, but who knows, maybe this is some early steps to getting there. All right, guys, thanks so much for everything. Reg, anything you want to promote? I know you were very active on social media, Twitter.
Yeah, Twitter, I'd say tweets a lot and people get upset about them, but I'm just, talking, being myself. You can catch me every Saturday, Grapsity Podcast on the Fightful Network. Also do Ask Grapsity every Thursday. And on Thursdays, I also do the ROH post show on Fightful, and Wednesdays, Indeed, on Fightful. So I have a lot of podcasts. If you want to hear me talk independent wrestling or Ring of Honor or all the other wrestling, you could find me somewhere.
Excellent. And it's at Righteous Reg, right? I think
at Righteous Reg.
Crawling at the bottom there. And Brian, I know you always got a lot going on. You got your own podcast as well outside of here. You've got books. You've got everything else.
New books, right?
That's right. I've got, my superheroes book. It's not wrestling related, but it just came out, and I almost feel like I don't talk about it enough because I never shut up about wrestling. but I have a new book on the history of superheroes that's out now, and it's called Superheroes: The History of a Pop Culture Phenomenon from Ant-Man to Zorro. That's the title. But the Gorilla Monsoon book is in the works. Irresistible Force, still kind of getting the wheels going on that. My podcast is Shut Up and Wrestle, which actually I just had Bob Smith, who was a former PWI columnist for years, especially, I remember reading his stuff when I was a kid. I had him as a guest, and my next episode is going to have Jannard Soley, who's the son of Gordon Soley. So it's my old school corner of the wrestling podcast world for people that want to check it out. Shut Up and Wrestle, SUAWpod.com.
I was reading your book in church the other day. Snuck it in to get.
That's on you, not me.
Yeah, may or may not be a sin.
All
right, guys. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow, this even worse.
I had to keep the cover covered up. Yeah. So
definitely
make it look like the what do they call it, the missile. Okay, guys. Thank you so much. Appreciate everybody tuning in. We will be back soon.
All right. Thank you.